Hello and welcome to this second recording in the new Azure Architect demo series. So in the first recording, I showed you how to set up the lab virtual machine that I'll be using throughout the series to complete the different exercises and the tasks for the different modules. So in this particular recording, I will be showing you how to use the Azure portal to deploy ARM templates using the template deployment service. So before I proceed with this content, I like to give a quick disclaimer. So this recording is more of an how-to video and not a deep dive video. So I make both types of content, and I believe that there is a place for the different types of content or different kinds of content. So I started giving disclaimers like this some time ago when I realized that sometimes the purpose for me making a video may not come across without me explicitly mentioning it. So I have people asking on some of my videos, why don't you go into in-depth explanation to explain what the technology is and how it's doing what it's doing? But that's a separate content for a different video. So this video has a different purpose in mind. Its purpose is just to do an how-to. It's a lab and demo series. I do have other content where I go in depth and do deep dive on certain technologies. So especially if you attend some of our live Azure Hangout sessions, we usually go in depth and explain and answer questions into the different technologies that we are discussing. So just be aware of that. So let's get into that. Um, what I'll first of all do is I'll show you the GitHub instructions that I'll be following today. And then I'll show you my own breakdown of the instructions, showing you the goal of what we're looking to achieve with each task. And this breakdown, I'll also post that on my blog, azurehangout.com. So please do refer to the blog post that I'll be posting in the description below. Also, any relevant links that I'll be referring to in this recording, I'll post them in the description below and also on my blog, azurehangout.com. So let's get into this. So this is module 2, and these are the instructions that we're following today. So we'll be creating the resource group, exercise 1 actually. I'll just go ahead and show you this here. So this is essentially what we're doing. This is a lab machine, which is the 20535A SEA architecture Windows 10 machine that we deployed a lot of relevant applications on that, like Visual Studio Code and others. And what we'll be doing is actually very simple and straightforward in this particular recording, because I'll just be showing you how to use the template deployment service on the Azure portal to deploy an Azure storage account, and then we'll deploy a function app um, that's within an app service plan in Azure. So yeah, the steps that we're following today. So again, that's the lab instructions there. And these are the different exercises and tasks. So we have 3 exercises to go through, excluding the cleanup, and we have different tasks within the exercises. So let's get right into that. First task is we want to create a resource group using the portal, and the goal is to create a resource group called MOD02 store in the East US region using the Azure portal. So let's go ahead and get into that. Excuse me. So go to my lab virtual machine, and what I'll do is I'll bring up shell.azure.com, which will log me into the Azure Cloud Shell. If this is the first time that you're logging into the Azure Cloud Shell, be aware that it's going to prompt you to create backend storage account. It's going to give you an option to customize that. In other words, for you to be able to specify some of your details. So under the advanced section. But because I have opened this before, it's no longer prompting me to create a storage account. So I'll just move on from there. So let's get familiar a bit with the Azure CLI. Not in a lot of details, but just so we know what we're using. So if I do AZ and if I do -help, usually what this will do is it's going to show me the group which I'm using, which is AZ, and then the subgroups, which are essentially the different Azure resources and services and components in some situations that I can interact with using the Azure CLI. So the one that I'm really interested in now is the AZ group. So if I go ahead and type AZ group, hyphen help, and then it's going to show me the commands that I could use with this subgroup. So I'm under AZ group, but then the commands I could create, or the commands are also the actions that I could take. So create, delete, I can check if a resource group exists, I can export, I can list, I can show, I can update, I can place a resource group, place the CLI in a waiting state under the condition of the resource group is met. So different actions that I can complete. So if I go on and I do AZ group create hyphen help. And also what this should show you is how you can essentially show yourself around this tool. So if you're not familiar with it, you could just use the hyphen help depending on any group or subgroup or action that you're under, and it's going to show you the help for that particular section. So here, because I'm under an action for a subgroup now, and it's showing me the arguments that I could use. And it gives me an example here. So for example, I can use this command to create a new resource group in the West US region. So I'm going to use an equivalent of that. So that will be AZ group create hyphen name and mod02 store, and then you can specify hyphen location East US. And if I press enter to that, it shows me that it succeeded in creating the resource group. So I'll create one more resource group. So just do task number 1, 2, and 3. So 02 apps. And now I have the resource group, the two resource groups. So if I do AZ group list, it shows me a list of all the resource groups, including the two resource groups that I created now. Okay. So the next thing that I'll do is we'll move to the next step, which will be to deploy a minimal template. So all these are instructions on the GitHub page, by the way, that you're following. What I'm doing is giving more breakdown to that and bit more explanation. So I'm going to deploy a minimal template, and the first task will be to deploy storage account ARM template to the existing mod02 store resource group that we created just now. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I go to the Azure portal, and then if I click on create a resource, and then if I search for templates deployment, and template deployment comes up, if I click on that, it takes me here. I can click on template deployment, and I can click on create. Now I have the option to either use a GitHub quick start template, which is not what we're using. I can just go ahead and build mine in the editor, which is what I'll click on. And what I'll do is I'll copy a basic template or a minimal template, and I'll paste it in here. So that's a minimal template that just deploys a storage account. It's going to randomly generate the name. So you can see we're using the concat function. So it's going to prefix it with store, and then it's going to generate a unique string using the resource group ID. So it's going to use that to generate a random storage account name. So I have that. If I click on save, and then I have to specify resource group name. So if I click on use existing and I specify my mod02 store resource group, I agree to the terms and condition. I click on purchase, and the deployment should begin now. So you can click on deployment in progress if you want to view what it's doing. It will also show you the duration that the deployment is taking. So you can carry on refreshing, and it's going to show that to you. So this should not take very long. So I don't think I'll pause the recording here. So let's see how long that takes. So seems to be showing status is okay now. So I think that should be, yep, and that's done now. So that took roughly around 32 seconds in my case. So now I have my resource group. So the next thing that we're meant to do is to um, review the deployment details of the template that we just deployed using the Azure portal. So to do that, if I go on the resource groups here, and if I click on my resource group that I did the deployment to, and under deployment, I can see all the different deployments that I've done to this group. And if I click on this deployment, I can see more details. I can click on operation details, and it's going to show me the operation details there. So that's just something to be aware of, that's how you find out um, what happened to your deployment. Or if you want to get more information, maybe there's a particular resource that failed deployment, you can click on operation details and it will show you why it failed deployment. So let's move on now to the next exercise, which will be to deploy a simple template. So the first task that we want to do is we're going to view an ARM template that we'll be deploying. So in this case, what we'll have is we have an ARM template on a lab virtual machine. If you follow the instructions that we have in the first video, you already have all these files on your lab virtual machine. So we're going to review an ARM template that is located on a lab VM to see what we're going to be deploying in essence. And so if I go back to my lab virtual machine and I browse to the F drive on the mod02 lab files data, and I have this deploy.json file. If I right click, I can open with code. That will open it up with Visual Studio Code. So now that we have this with Visual Studio Code, remember that we'll also install the Azure RM extension into Visual Studio Code, so it's able to understand the schema and it's able to use features like IntelliSense to give us more information. So looking at this, you can see, for example, if I click on here, the Explorer, I can see some outline of my deployment to the left-hand side. I can see the different sections, schema, content, parameters, variable, resources, and output. I can expand resources to see the resources that I'm creating. So I can see I'm creating, it's going to create a storage account. It's going to create a web server farm, and it's going to create an Azure app service. Is type microsoft.web/sites provider, but it's going to create an Azure app service, which is a kind which will be function app. So if I scroll down here, you can see the kind of this is function app, and it gives information about the 3 different resources that we'll be deploying with this template. So what I'll do is I'll minimize this, and then I'll go ahead and deploy the template. So to deploy the template, to go back to the Azure portal, I click on create a resource. I search again for templates deployment. I select template deployment by Microsoft and I click on create. And again, I come to the screen where I can do a custom deployment. I want to build my own template in the editor, but this time around, we're not going to copy and paste the content. We can actually click on load file, where I go to the location of my template on my machine, and it's going to load the file, and you can see the file's been loaded here. And again, we can review it from here if we want to see what we'll be deploying. I click on save, and then I can fill in the necessary parameters for the deployment to start. So we're going to use the existing resource group, and I'm going to put that into mod02 apps. So for the function app name, we have to specify something that's unique. So my recommendation is to put some random characters or some unique, not characters, random numbers at the end to make it as unique as possible. So for example, I can do do func 090318 for the date that I'm doing this recording, and I can agree to the terms and conditions, and then I can click on purchase, and the deployment should start. So for this one, I will actually pause the recording because it will take a while to finish. So you can see here that it started the deployment. If I refresh I'll actually see when it starts to deploy the different resources. So it started deploying the storage account, and then it's going to move on to the other resources, deploy an Azure App Service Plan, and then deploy a function app in the app service plan. So I'll pause the recording now. Once this finishes, I'll come back and then we'll review the deployment details like we did for the earlier deployment that we did, and then we'll round up this video. So I'll see you shortly. And welcome back. So actually the deployment didn't take too long at all. So it took just 54 seconds to complete. And you can see all the different resources that it created. So if I go on the function apps, I can see the function app that it created. If I go on the app services, because the function app in this case resides in an app service plan, because there are two modes that we can deploy an Azure function app in. We can deploy it in the consumption mode. In other words, it's not we're not paying for a machine as such, or we can deploy it into an app service plan. The latter is what I'm using, or what we're using in this lab in this case, into an app service plan. So that's why it's showing up on the app services, because the function app resides in an app service plan. So actually, if I go back under the function apps and I click on my function app, I have the URL there. If I click on that URL, that should take me to show me that the function app is up and running. I have no code currently deployed into it, but I have a functioning function app. So the next thing that I would do, if I go back to the Azure portal and I go under resource groups, I can go on the MOD02 apps and go under deployment, and I can see the deployment that we did, and then I'll be able to see the operation details for what happened. So if I click on that, for example, it's going to show me the operation details and that it succeeded. If there was any failure, I can review to see what happened or what caused failure. So that's really it for this particular recording. It's just a basic one to show you how to use the Azure templates deployment service in the Azure portal to deploy templates. So you can either copy the template code and paste it and deploy it. You can load from a GitHub Quick Start template. You can construct one yourself if you're familiar with how to construct that. You can load a file, a template file that you have on your machine somewhere else. You can load that and deploy that. So for the final part of this, we will be cleaning up the two resource groups that we created, and then we can move on. So what I'll do is we'll go back to the Azure Cloud Shell and we'll run a few command lines to delete it. So that AZ group delete, and then we'll specify the name. Or if I do -help, it's going to show us an example. So it says AZ group delete the name of the resource group. So I can copy that and I can paste that here. So for the name, MOD02 store, but you see this argument here, no wait, do not wait for the long running operation to finish, because I'm not sure, depends on how many resources I have in this resource group. It could take a while to delete. So I don't want it to just sit there on the command line while it's waiting to complete the action. I can specify no wait to say, issue the command to delete the resource group and let me move on the command line. So that's what -no wait is for. And -yes or -y is used to say, do not prompt me for confirmation. So name, and then if I run that, that begins the deletion and lets me move on. I can do the same for the other resource group, which is apps. I run that, and that begins the process. If I do AZ group list now, you'll see that the state for this is in deleting, provisioning state, and the state for this is in deleting. But it let me move on because of the no wait arguments that we issued on the command line. So I hope this has been useful for you. So I'll see you in the next recording. So in the next recording, we'll get into some of the more interesting aspects of using an ARM template to carry out deployment. So in the next In the next recording, we'll be using NAM template to deploy PowerShell desired state configuration to an Azure virtual machine, standalone machine, and we'll be doing the same for a virtual machine skill set in Azure. So I'll see you in the next recording. Thanks very much.